All right, welcome everyone. We're going to get started right away here. I just want to welcome you all and thank you for being here. We really need you all to stay engaged during this transition time, and so I'm grateful that you're all here. I'm just preaching to the choir, I know. So if you can come to everything we're doing, read your emails from us, read your emails from your board. Just stay engaged during this time and we'll get through this transition. I wanted to share with you how we're going to do the questions. The chat is turned off, as you probably noticed. We just want to get through the material, but we do want your questions. Those are very important to us. So please type your questions into the question section here, and we will go through those. There'll probably be some duplicates, and we're going to distill them down to kind of an FAQ sort of format that we can post and share with you and put on our resource center. But we want your questions. We need your questions. And we're looking forward to seeing what you all have and the feedback you offer. So I want to bring Phil on. Phil Navarre, our Director of Agent Development, is going to lead us through this webinar. So.
All right, thank you, Amy. Hey, it's good to see everybody here. I really appreciate everyone getting on board with this. This is, let me start with what we always start with for a second, and that is this whole idea here is the mission. You know, what is Key all about? What is our mission and vision? And what that is to give every agent a fighting chance at success. And that's why you're here. That's why we spent the time doing these things. That's why we're adjusting to this market. We want to redefine what's possible, empowering agents to feel connected, competent in their abilities, and encouraged by their circumstances so they can provide clients with world-class service. This company is focused around, it's an agent-centric company who then is very much client-centric in helping people, sellers sell and buyers buy. And that's what this is all about. So in this new environment, we're moving forward. And this is everything you really need to get paid. We put that as to get your attention on this topic. So let's get going. So the change in the way forward, that's what we're talking about today. So we're going to talk about what do we know. We're also going to talk about what we need to do and how we're going to go about doing that. So we're going to get going. This is going to be 55 minutes or less. It is recorded. You will be able to get a copy of this, and it's also going to be used the next week in the training on how to move forward with exactly in the offices. As Amy said, we're not going to answer questions during the session. I was talking to Andy and I was talking to Crystal yesterday, and they asked me a couple of questions, said, yeah, you're right, man, you could go. This would just, it'll take the focus away. You could spend 15 minutes answering a question. So we're going to focus on these. And then the questions are going to do two things. Partly, it will also direct things that we may have missed out there, but it also is going to help us form the education backbone too. And we'll have the questions delivered in a way to help you succeed with your clients. We're also going to have links and resources provided at the end. There is going to be follow-up. There's going to be a list of additional meetings. We're going to cover the guidelines, policies, when we're doing them. And so today's outline, where are we at? We're going to go through some new legal requirements. We're going to go through some key specific policy and guidelines. We're going to go through our forms. Now we want to, as I said, we want to use ours wherever possible. We have our group in Indiana with us also. In Indiana, they have forms that are dictated by the state that they must use. And believe it or not, they kicked them off on July 1st. So they've already moving through this. But some of our forms you'll use whenever possible. Listing agreements. We're going to go over what's changed in listing agreement and what that looks like in talking to your clients. Current and pending listings. So any pending listings and active listings have to be addressed in its own way also. And any of the language change that will be involved. And you can take a look at that. And then the buyer's rep agreement. What's in it, how this is going to move forward, and what's the next steps. All right. So I kind of want to show you the old way and the new way. So when you think about what the Department of Justice thought and how they're looking at this, the Department of Justice in this, the settlement is what the settlement is. And you could justify it this way or any, however it is, the reality is this is what we're dealing with. So I don't want to talk about it much other than how what the new reality looks like. So in the old way, a listing was listed, and then that seller and the listing company decided what the buyer's agent was going to get paid. What they want to do is really separate this whole thing. And how they're going to separate it is the listing is taken by the listing broker, agent, and the seller. And they determine what they're going to get paid. And that agent's job is to market their property and negotiate in their best behalf. The other side of the transaction is a buyer and the buyer's agent. They will then determine what their compensation is, and that agent's job is to find them the right property and negotiate in their best behalf in terms and get the transaction closed, right? So it's separation of the two. When you kind of look at it, this is kind of the old way when you think about it. This was actually a reworked ad. We didn't want to run the exact ad, but it was, hurry, bring your summer buyers. Make an extra $8,500 to the buyer's broker agent when you're under contract by a certain date and close by a certain date. And when you think about that, they're really kind of saying, throw your agent under the bus to get paid a bunch of extra money. And that, and then this, and at this full 3% commission. Guys, the commissions are determined by your client, the buyer. And so that's the old way. But let me show you where I think the new way is. This is kind of this is the consumer-centric model, right? The consumer-centric model. And that's what we're all about. When you look at this, and I think this is a positive thing, consumer-centric model, this was a kind of an ad, adaptive an ad. It was actually ran in a market, and it says new listing. And there's $10,000 of flex cash, an amazing incentive for home buyers. They can use toward reducing the sale price, closing costs. This particular one was actually a builder, closing costs, adding additional options to the property, or paying your acquisition costs. So it gives them this money to move forward and how. And it really is the buyer's money, right? So that's kind of the new model. That's the consumer-centric model. So moving forward with the new legal requirements. And this is the nitty-gritty of where we're at. I will say two things. We're dealing with Michigan, Indiana, and Ohio. We're dealing with multiple boards. The dates when these come in are going to be very board specific. Okay, we know some boards, some large boards are waiting till the very last day. It's going to be the 17th. Other ones are implementing the 1st, and some in between. We just had a notion of a board in Michigan that maybe even quite a bit sooner than that. So there's no broker compensation offered after that date. So it's just becoming on your state or multiple listing service. The reason we're not taking a big dive, deep dive into the paperwork is each office is going to do that because you're going to use the specific rules for your board and area. So the DOJ, Department of Justice, wants no workarounds. So the co-broker compensation goes away. They don't want workarounds. We've agreed to operate in good faith. They don't want to put in Facebook, showing time, comments, nothing like that. The reality is they want to see fee separation. I think what people what people are realizing about the Justice Department is part of this is not only setting a commission, what they feel could be price fixing, and the FTC concern is, but they don't want fees split. They don't want fees split in any circumstances in industries that they oversee. So the buyer agreement is going to be used no later than August 17th or sooner. And it's really going to be, honestly, the sooner the better. It must be signed prior to showings. That agreement has to be signed prior for showings. And also, so it's mandatory use of it. It's got to be signed prior to the showing. The agreement, with no agreement, you're not getting paid. It really is that simple. It has to have, and if the buyer doesn't have the fee to pay you, even if you have it signed, if the buyer doesn't have the fee to pay you, you need to put language in to make sure you're paid through the other side of the transaction as a seller concession. So that's going to have to happen. Also, it has to be a set amount of money. It can't be some open-ended agreement. It has to have an end date. It has to have a set amount of money. And so what it means by that, if you agree to 3%, even if the seller or there's other compensation from another source above that, that becomes the buyer's money. It's not additional money that you can claim. And guys, think about this for a second. It's a little bit like an attorney on the other side of a transaction adding additional money to your attorney to get them to do something that the other side wants. It's kind of how you have to kind of look at this, right? So what are the considerations here? The new legal discrimination considerations continued. Dual agency, it's permitted. It's not recommended, but it is permitted. We actually prefer using an unrepresented buyer agreement on the listing side only. So if you are the listing agent, a buyer comes directly to you where the buyer can still purchase the property, but they'll be unrepresented. That's still an acceptable way to move forward on these transactions. What we're not a limited service company or a transaction broker. We're just going to be just a transaction broker, limited service. So we've never allowed that. We've never been a listing company that says we'll take the listing, just put it in the MLS, you can pay us a few bucks, and then you negotiate directly, set your own appointments, negotiate directly with the seller. We're not doing that on the listing side, and we're not going to allow that on the buyer side either. It's not recommended. We know there's a couple circumstances every now and then, but that is not a recommended process that we're moving forward with. Listing commissions. So we're going to have to address the listing commissions in the listing agreements in the three different circumstances: a new listing, a listing that's under contract after the date comes and goes, and one that isn't under contract. And we're going to discuss that a little bit more. And then we're going to talk about some buyer representation agreement compliance here. All right, so getting paid in the buyer. So there has to be some kind of explanation prior to the signature. So you have to have a buyer's agreement prior to showing the house. You can't stand it under the driveway and say, I'm not allowed to sign, not allowed to show it unless you sign this paper, sign here, everyone has to do it. There has to be some kind of explanation of what they're actually signing. The states have been very clear on that. You can't mislead someone into signing a document. Really not much different than if you were listing someone's house. You could just sign it and say, now you're stuck for 6 months. It has to have some kind of explanation. We're going to give you plenty of background on how to do that, dialogues, the buyer's presentation. It's all going to be about building value, guys. When people say they won't sign it, they won't sign it if they don't build value and see and understand that it has to have an expiration date, has to have a signature on it, and there has to have been a copy given to the client. You've got to do some kind of work, right? There has to be an amount or a percentage that they know the compensation is. It's got to be something that you can actually define. And you can't just, when I say some work, to be enforceable, you can't sign people up to buyer's agency agreements and never contact them again and just check to see if they bought a house and say they owe you a commission. No different than listing a house and not doing any work. Just putting this, it doesn't work that way. And all states are going to require that that form is signed. All right. The listing guidelines. We're going to switch to listings. Guys, I know I'm moving pretty quickly in this, but there's a fair amount to cover. All this is going to cover in a deep dive in the classrooms. Honestly, if I can recommend anything, this is the biggest thing you're going to have to do is say, wow, that was a lot to cover. It's going to be, this is going to be covered in the classes. It's going to be covered in the knowledge base. It's going to be covered in our policy and procedures. It's going to be covered in these boot camps we're going to do. We're going to come in and put a lot of this will do the hard work so you will be able to understand how to present these. So listing guidelines. Now, these are suggestions. These are suggestions. They're not mandated. We've never worked as a discount broker. These are the minimums that we suggest out there. So if you take a listing, remember how this is going to work in the future in the sense that when you take a listing, you are going to be the listing agent and you're being paid for marketing, negotiating, and getting that closing, that property to closing. So you're not charging the full commission, you're charging half of that commission. And so we recommend that would be a minimum of 3%. We think there should be some kind of minimum for your efforts, and we put $3,000. We think if you're both sides, so even that, so if you bring a buyer comes directly to you as the listing agent, then we think the minimum you should charge them is 4% for having a listing and bringing the buyer. All right. recommended seller concessions. So how this is going to work, you're going to list the property on that side, but then you're going to also ask them, do they want to cooperate with buyers? Do they want to offer some kind of cooperation to buyers to help them pay the acquisition costs? So there's going to be a checkbox, yes or no. Most MLSs are going to have this same arrangement that you're going to check, yes, you want to cooperate, or no, you don't want to cooperate. Now, when you think about this a little bit, why would most people put their house in the MLS if they didn't want to get as many, cooperate with other agents? So we're going to do all that total exposure, not just our buyers or company buyers, but all those other agents in the market will show the house. And do they want to compensate them or not? And you'll have a dialogue to work through this, and it's yes or no. I think, honestly, it will be yes in most cases. And then there's the next box is, do they want to put an amount in? They can put a set amount in, they can put a percentage in, or they can leave it open. So there is a lot of pros and cons to this. I think some of it is going to depend on the price of the property. I think on the upper end, it won't matter so much when a lot of buyers will pay their own agent, but they're open to it. And I think there's going to be on the lower end, I don't know. So we could have, it was funny when we were talking about this, we could have a 40-minute discussion just on this, but that is what we will talk about in the seminars, in the boot camps, in the classes next week of how you can think this through and talk to your seller about it. I think part of the conversation, guys, kind of goes this way. If you ask a seller when they purchased the house, did you pay the commission? Or was the commission, when you were the buyer, did you pay the commission, or was the commission paid on your behalf through the seller? I think most people will say it was paid by the seller. So your response to them is, what I'm asking you is to consider that same circumstance. It's really the power of what we do. And guys, the one thing I will say is this: you can reach out to, you absolutely can put concessions in here. The DOJ has actually made something very clear, and they actually agree with us that the one thing that the argument that we did have is that it will be harder for buyers to pay that don't have a lot of cash formation and the ability to do and bring money to the closing, that it could hurt that. And they have said, listen, we have no trouble with a buyer asking that their fee be paid by the seller. They don't have a problem with that, but it's driven by the buyer, and the buyer chooses the amount. So I wouldn't get too tied up in that, in a sense that the Department of Justice thinks that's a good thing. The other thing I would say is this: you're going to need to work with really good lenders. I was talking to Paula yesterday, and Paula from our mortgage company, and the best lenders are going to talk to their buyer about this. Are they A, bringing cash for closing to cover that, or B, would they like to finance that in their mortgage? And good lenders, and this is going to be a key. I think there's going to be true relationship with lenders and lenders that understand the process. And Paula and her team has a great grasp of how the advantages of moving this forward. And then recommended buyer's agent compensation. This is a guideline, guys. We think 275 is that low number. I mean, obviously it can be sliding scale and much larger, whatever that's going to work in your market. But this isn't a mandatory thing. Everything is negotiable in that regards. And it's a guideline, but we've never given our services away. I don't think you should. If you build value with that buyer, with a great presentation and hard work that you do, we don't think that's going to be an issue moving forward. And then any excess offering, if there's any additional that over what you charge, it has to go to the buyer. Go to the buyer, or it's not collected, reducing the price. You cannot collect more than you've agreed to in the contract. All right. So we're going to talk about lists, changing gears a little bit. We're going to talk about listings. And one of the things that we're going to look for is that we have to kind of address is this: if you have a pending listing prior to the deadline coming in. So if the deadline is the 1st in our market, 17th in the market term, whichever date that is, after that, if it's pending, so you have an accepted offer on the property, they were offering whatever their co-broke was, you have a contract in place, it was in MLS, everything stays the same. There's no need for new paperwork. There's no need for anything additional. We've talked to every board we've talked to said no, everything would stay prior to that. everything would stay the same. It would close under the terms that were offered in the multiple listing and on the purchase agreement. No additional paperwork would need to be done, and the regular compensation would go through the broker. The next scenario, though, is you have an active listing in the multiple listing service. So an active listing in multiple listing service, it was listed at 7%. We're only key agents here, so I can mention all the numbers I want to. Which is, it was listed at 7%, and you had under item number 6 compensation that you're going to offer a 3% compensation through the multiple listing to the seller and broker. So what happens in that circumstance is you are going to need some kind of addendum signed. Now, you could just have the new contract signed that would address this, but in some respects, having an addendum signed, it simply is going to amend the compensation for the listing and remove the co-broke and have an explanation whether they want to offer any seller concessions in the MLS. So what it'll do, you'll have an addendum signed. The addendum is going to explain the compensation for the listing agent. And basically it will say something to the effect, and we didn't want to present all the forms here today. It would just be too bogged down. We'd spend 15 minutes explaining just this form, but you'll have the form with an explanation of what it looks like, and you'll deeper dive in the office, guys. Guys, the key in this is going to be, you have to plug into the education. You just absolutely have to read Army emails. You have to look at the stuff we're sending you about this, and you have to plug into the board deadlines. Where I don't want you is the crazy Facebook posts, some of the crazy TikTok stuff I've seen. I've seen some really crazy stuff that honestly isn't really applicable or is just inflammatory, which doesn't work. And it's not where we want to go. So the explanation, so you'll explain to the seller, we're going to reduce that. Now it's just the list side of the commission. That compensation isn't going to be offered necessarily to now through the multiple listing service. It's not going to be offered through the multiple listing service as a co-broke. So the commission, if you were offering 3, there was 7. Now the listing commission is 7%. You could make a note as to what you would be paid if you brought the buyer, as we talked about before, could be addressed in there. If you brought the buyer yourself, and then also an explanation. Do they want to offer some kind of concessions? It'll be a yes, no. And then what the amount is. Do they want to offer an amount, flat fee, percentage, or leave it blank and open to that, to the buyer's broker when they show the property? And it's the form will be called listing addendum compensation adjustment agreement, and that will be in your hands when we hit these deadlines. And I want to make a comment about this. Maybe this is a good time to share this. If you think about this and you say, well, what if someone puts yes, but they don't put an amount in there? And our kind of thoughts on this, and we'll work through this in the workshops. But our thoughts are in this is, have you ever had, you would have to explain if you're the buyer's agent and they said they didn't put an amount in, or they said they weren't paying compensation. They put no under compensation. But as a buyer's agent, you would have to get this buyer's permission. One, you won't be able to search by that. But if you saw that and the buyer says, hey, that would really be difficult on me. And depending on how, you could talk to your buyer and say, we could still see it and understand that that compensation does need to be paid somehow. We can always ask the seller to do it. Because when you think about this, lots of times we've had sellers that say, I absolutely will not take less than $300,000 for my house. And then you bring them an offer for $290 and they don't even counter it, and they just take it. So when you think about a good, and ultimately how you'd want to present this, it's really going to be presented not on that they're paying that, but what is the net, right? This is really where net sheets and presenting offers, it's going to be not what they're paying the buyer broker, because quite frankly, that was an agreement between the buyer broker and their buyer. But what do you net? If they ask you to pay 3%, then so be it. If they ask you to 2%, but you just need to up your amount of money to cover that amount. And that's kind of really the conversations we need to have with sellers so they can get their houses sold and exposed to the most people. So buyer's agency policies. So there is going to be mandatory use of buyer's agent agreement. The key agreement is preferred. I understand that some limitations in some of the markets with Indiana, et cetera. It's going to be required to once it's signed before showing properties, it's be required to open up a buyer's loop and put that agreement in the loop. Now, you're not going to have to submit that. Once you open up that buyer's loop, you're not going to have to submit that agreement at that time. Now, our buyer's agreement does allow for retainer fee to be charged, a non-refundable retainer fee. If you do indeed charge a non-refundable retainer fee, which seems to be believed there could be, that may be a more common thing in the market, the retainer fee then actually reduces, is a credit to them when they purchase a house. If you do collect a retainer fee, then that paper will have paperwork for the retainer fee, and that loop would be then reviewed at that time. If there isn't a retainer fee, the loop would be sent for review once they have an accepted offer on a property. Now, I know you can see it here, and I kind of did that nice and slow as I could. I know I'm accused of speaking quickly sometimes. So basically, you'll open up a loop, you'll have them sign the agreement. It's only submitted upon acceptance or the retainer fee. And then we're not going to allow, as I said before, we're not going to allow limited service brokers where you're just limited service buyers agents where you just open up doors for a fee. And we're not going to allow per hour buyer agency is not going to be permitted. I'm going to make a quick comment about this because I think it's important. If you did charge a per hour agency fee, there's a couple of issues with it. One, it really devalues what you do. Secondly, it's almost impossible to do the correct hours and keeping the hours and track of the hours. There's lots of attorneys that have lost their licenses over the years because you actually have to have a log of the times and the start dates, start and stop, and it's got to be correctly done and then submitted properly. You can't just say, well, I did work this many hours. It's fraught with the potential for real issues with agents. It's not in your best interest, and we do not think it's in the best interest of buyers either. And then also, you will not be able to amend the contract to collect excess over what you agreed to on your buyer's agreement. Any questions, Amy?
No, I would add, just in case they missed it, that you know, the requirement to have a buyer agreement is not ours. It's the law at this point, or will be as of August 18th. So please don't feel like we're nitpicking your files, but that's just the way it's going to be now. So just want to clarify that it's not us requiring this.
So, I mean, you know, I'm glad you brought that up. And, you know, it's one of the things, and like, even I've seen board rules, different places and the changes they've made, but most of them, I know when you guys have a lot of fear of a couple different things, you're going to sign multiple agreements. You know, we're changing the agreement. So there's a checkbox that they say they've not entered into any other agreements. I know there's some fears of some people will abuse this. I know many boards are having that it's mandatory as part of the MLS because of the settlement that they use that buyer's agreement prior to. And we're not going to get into this where no board wants to get into this, prove it and show me the agreement. That's a bad practice. I don't want to go too far in the weeds here, but there's a bad practice of asking the other one, well, I want to see the agreement and know that when they put that number in there, it'd be no different than, think of the other way. As a buyer, you can't say, well, I want to see what the listing agent is going to be paid. But the boards, the MLSs can have a rule that they can want evidence that you actually had an agreement prior to, and you can be fine without it, just like you can be fine without having a listing agreement. Most of them don't look at them, but they will in case to verify you have and the ability to do that. So there will be some oversight that way. Also, if you were asking something you weren't entitled to, that's a license violation in Michigan, Indiana, and Ohio. So that will be part of the things you'll look at. So local board, so just remember, it's going to be agreements. It's going to be required. We're recommending the sooner the better. It's going to be required basically on the date on the date your board converts over. So if the earlier your board converts over, the more quickly you're going to need it, because then there's no obligation to get paid. And then this way, there is no co-broke that's being offered after that date. So you're going to have this one. So either the buyer is going to pay you, and if the buyer isn't going to pay you, giving permission that the buyer can ask the seller to cover. If they can't afford to do it, they can ask the seller to pay concessions to cover it. Okay. And it's required. So chances of getting paid are really jeopardized if you're not doing this. the buyer rep agreement will be required in the loops for sure. Skills needed to succeed in this environment. You got to get appointments, right? This isn't going to be done at the end of the driveway. You have to get appointments and do the presentation before you sign agreements. You have to master the objections. We have the objection, there's objections that are already filmed that you can look through. No one else made me sign this. It's the new environment. Everyone has to comply by this law. Yes, I agree. Even a month ago, you didn't. But even a month ago, you didn't. I agree completely. And you're going to have to master those agreements, master those objections. You're going to have to get agreements signed. Do I think sometimes that there will be some buyers that say, geez, I've only met you a little bit, or geez, I won't want to commit to 6 months, or, how about this one? It won't honestly be much different than when you think about a one-party listing or a seller that's not willing to commit for a full listing. You can amend the agreement to be for 1 day. You can amend the agreement to be for one property. There is a cancellation. There's a termination in there that we can terminate too. If you sign up, you're thinking, oh my gosh, I want to sign up these people. Maybe I don't want to work with them later. There's also a termination agreement on our side also, but you're going to have to get that done. And I honestly believe that once you get through this and everyone has to do it, it will not be difficult. I've always joked a little bit that if we didn't have to get listing agreements that are required, there'd be probably half of the people wouldn't get them. And I always said, as soon as we buyer's agency agreements are required, we'll have 100% compliance. And I really do believe that it's just going to be a change of how you do business. And everyone's on the same playing field too. Sellers, you're going to have to explain the concession so they understand, and so they understand the advantages of how they want to present that. You just have to get really good at it and explain half the commission. Now, what you do for half that commission, representing them, negotiating for them, marketing the property, getting it to closing. Most important thing is come to class. We're going to dig deep in exactly how to explain these things in class, but it's going to be all about coming to class. Suggested purchase agreement language. So there is going to be, in this interim, you could have right now a company offering very small amount or next to nothing until the change actually comes into place. If there still is a go-broke offering prior to this deadline, the buyer brokerage contract that we've used in the past, the buyer's brokerage is declining cooperation, compensation offered for multiple listing service, the seller agrees to pay 3% buyer's agent's representation fee prior to brokerage or to the buyer's brokerage upon closing. And that's the language we use for 10 plus years and have never had an issue with. Probably going to need those things to protect yourself until this stuff goes into play. If it's not addressed in the board agreement, so some board agreements are actually going to address it right in there, what the compensation language looks like, and you have some things. But if it's not addressed in the board agreement, this does not, and the reason we put this in here, it doesn't have to be overly complicated. The seller agrees to pay the brokerage fee upon closing upon successful closing of the property. And that would, that's acceptable through the Department of Justice because it's driven by your agreement and asked to be put into the contract by the buyer. What's next? So get into the regional follow-up meetings, right? You got to get into the meetings, the boot camp. Next week, they're going to do a deep dive in the paperwork for your individual boards and how this affects you. Review this recorded meeting. That will be there too. Get into the buyer representation and presentation, the buyer representation agreement, learn it, practice it. The agreement we're going to use is a 3-page agreement. It's very clear. We're going to use the same one in Michigan and Ohio to make some things easier on our agents. We've seen some very complicated ones out there in the States, and I know Indiana has their own things, but we're going to do the ones that agreement we think will work. We will make changes to it if it has to for the market. The cool thing is the way our company is designed with .loop, we can quickly adjust to these things. The other thing I would do is throw all your old paperwork out, blank forms in your briefcase, folders. A listing agreement is going to get you in trouble that doesn't comply. purchase agreements, and they will need to be updated. So those old ones floating around, throw them away once this thing hits in. Get your friends on board that aren't here. Yes, Amy.
I was just gonna say, and we're going to be updating it regularly, so, yeah.
Yeah. Amy makes the point of, I wouldn't make it. Things were going to change, guys. We have this as right as we can have it right now, but we know, even based on your questions that we're going to do address, we know there's going to be some changes right away. So even this, you're going to be using the most current dot loop agreement, and we're going to have there's going to be a real effort to make sure things are super current, things are super adjusted where there. So, and then you're going to have to practice the objection responses. Forms, there's going to be updated listing agreement. Obviously, there's going to be updated buyer agreement. There's going to be unrepresented buyer agreement that's used by the listing agent only in the circumstance of they come directly to you to purchase the property. There'll be the listing addendum, that compensation adjustment agreement we spoke about. There'll be a buyer's release with protection. So if buyer no longer works with you, or you don't want to work with the buyer, but those previous properties you showed them would still be covered for 6 months. The buyer's agreement without protection is someone you just want to be done with. Guys, I think sometimes what we forget about, if you have a listing and you want that listing, the seller has to agree to be released from the listing. And so this is the same thing. This is a contract. They have to agree to be released. So there is a termination agreement that goes both ways. I don't want to go too deep, but that's why that's in there actually. Recap of the key points, guys. You can have a buyer's agreement signed with every client. If you don't negotiate compensation with the buyer, you're not going to get paid. If the seller's compensating the buyer's agent, it must be in the purchase agreement. Dual agents discouraged but not disallowed. The listing agent, unrepresented buyer should be a customer, not a client. We believe it's in the best interest of everyone, and there's some push in that direction. Buyer's agreements cannot be amended to collect excess compensation or concessions offered by the seller. The extra can only go to the client or reduce purchase price that would both benefit the client. You have to start putting these places into place now, guys. Don't wait until the very last minute to move forward. Check your region calendars for the regional specific masterminds. They're using this new, the changes, focusing on the changes. It's all the week of the 15th. Future town halls and meetings, as the deadlines change, will occur to address certain things that maybe we want to get in front of you quickly. There'll be videos available too. Mastermind series focusing on the skills needed to work in this new world. There's buyer's rep agreement mastermind, the listing contract changes, and the objections. Part of these have been filmed and will also come out and be available. There's going to be in-person virtual boot camps coming to your area in August and September. And then our resources. So if you go to the NAR settlement resources, it's inside the key knowledge base. You click on the link at the top, NAR settlement resources, and it's actually being updated. Parts of these are being updated as we speak, added in. This will be dropped in there, and the new agreements are going to be in there too. Resources is your manager. Your manager in these classrooms getting in there, your state and local boards, the mastermind series, future town hall meetings. Leadership has put a lot in this. You guys are very lucky, and that this leadership has been around and very knowledgeable and is working with the best minds in the business and consulting with the best people of how to move this thing forward. The upcoming boot camps. What's not a resource, guys, is Facebook, Instagram, news outlets. I've seen things so misreported. Some of these, even NAR's, kind of their Facebook, the posts that were in there by people really just out of line. And we need to put that stuff behind us and move forward. Conclude, I'm going to just kind of a conclusion. I really do believe this. These changes right now might seem very daunting, but in time, this will really be business as usual. If and only if you plug into training, you read our communications from those and the communications from us and those from your local boards. Agents who embrace the change and challenges in the past have not only survived, but they've thrived. We've gone through different things that were supposed to put us out of business. And every time the companies that adapted quickly and the agents did thrived. They absolutely thrived. And we're here to support you. We're here to help you to prosper. Thank you for attending this class. We promised it would be under an hour. I know Amy has a couple things to say too. And please, I'm looking forward to seeing you in upcoming classes and meetings. Thanks for the support you've offered us. We really are serious about, we want to give you a fighting chance. And we really think we're going to position you to really be able to take care of your customers, empower you to take care of your customers and clients, and provide them with world-class service. So thank you for the time. I appreciate it. Look forward to seeing you guys in the different areas too. You want to say anything quick?
Not really. Thank you all again for coming. Just to underscore, we are going to repeat this information in your local mastermind group. So check your calendar for that this coming week. So if you can't make your specific regional version and you want to hear this again, feel free to hop on somebody else's region and watch it there. So we have that coming up. The following week, we're going to be covering the purchase agreement, and you know, a lot of regions have a new agreement, and we're going to talk a little bit more about writing it in there so that it is friendly for a lender if you're going to be asking for considerations. And anyway, we're grateful that you're all here, and Phil thought I had something to say, which I really didn't. And so I'm ruining his wonderful conclusion, but thanks again for being here and have a great day.
Oh, Amy didn't ruin anything. Thanks, guys. We're excited for you. I honestly think this is gonna be a great way forward, guys. I'm really excited you've been on the call. Thank you for your time. Enjoy the rest of your weekend. Talk to you soon, everyone. Thank you again.
Oh, that's a good number. People were having trouble signing up or signing in. I'm not sure